1 in every 100 people lives with a facial scar, a mark that data shows can make you twice as likely to face depression and romantic rejection. We are conditioned to see these lines as a story of damage, a flaw that makes you unlovable. But what if the most profound rejection isn't coming from the world outside? What if the deepest scar is the one you can't see, the expectation of judgment that twists every glance? And what if the latest science holds a secret that turns this entire painful story upside down? This is the story of the Dartmouth Scar Experiment, a chilling psychological study that proved the expectation of a scar could distort reality more than the scar itself. It reveals a haunting loop where fear of rejection breeds the very isolation it predicts. But this documentary isn't just about the lab. It's about the real-world frontier where that fear collides with a startling new truth. What happens when someone carrying that invisible burden of expectation meets a gaze that doesn't look away, but sees something else entirely? The year was 1972. At Dartmouth College, psychologists staged a radical experiment to measure the weight of a stare. They recruited ordinary women, telling them they were studying how people with facial disfigurements were treated in social interactions. Each participant was brought into a room where a makeup artist applied what looked like a thick, livid scar across her cheek. She was shown the result in a mirror. Then the artist said she would apply a powder to seal the makeup to prevent smudging. But in that critical moment, the artist secretly wiped the entire scar away. The participant was sent out into public, believing her face was marked, but wearing no scar at all. Every single woman returned with the same report. They described the averted eyes, the whispered comments, the palpable pity and disgust from strangers. They had gone looking for rejection, and their minds had manufactured it from thin air. The study proved a devastating truth. The anticipation of stigma is so powerful it can warp your perception of reality. You see the judgment you expect to see. This internal script of rejection doesn't just predict social failure, it authors it. For decades, this finding framed our understanding. It explained why the statistics are so brutal: a 26% prevalence of anxiety, a 21% rate of depression for those with facial differences, nearly double the general population. The social world isn't just passively hostile, the individual's own fear becomes an active engine of isolation. But here, where the story twists, modern science is now asking a dangerous question. What if we've been telling the wrong story about scars altogether? What if the real disfigurement isn't on the skin, but in the culture that teaches us how to see it? To understand this, we must go back further, to the ancient wiring of our own brains. Humans are pattern recognition machines, and we are notoriously bad at distinguishing correlation from causation. For millennia, a visible mark or asymmetry was often the only external sign of an internal threat: disease, like smallpox or the plague, or injury that could signal weakness. Our neural pathways evolved to flag difference as potential danger. This hardwired bias was then sculpted by story. From the biblical Mark of Cain to Shakespeare's Richard III, from Hollywood's scarred villains to our everyday language where we brand someone a liar, the cultural narrative has been unequivocal. What is different is suspect, and what is marred is morally corrupt. This isn't just metaphor. Neuroimaging studies show that when people see a face with a disfigurement, there's a flash of activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, before the rational cortex can catch up. The reaction is automatic, primal. Society then provides the rationale for that gut fear. And for women, this burden is exponentially heavier. Research consistently shows women with facial differences report higher levels of distress. The reason is chilling in its simplicity. A woman's social value has historically been, and often still is, disproportionately tied to her appearance. A scar isn't just a mark, it's seen as a devaluation of her entire currency in the world. This creates a perfect psychological trap. The Dartmouth fear lives here, fed by centuries of cultural programming and reinforced by every glance you imagine is a second too long, every conversation that feels politely cut short. You become a prisoner in a panopticon of your own design, forever monitoring for evidence that confirms your deepest fear, that you are now and always will be unlovable. This is the internal landscape our protagonist carries when she steps off that train. It's not just a scar on her cheek. It's the entire weight of the Dartmouth experiment, the amygdala's flinch, and a lifetime of stories that say her story is already over. She expects the rancher's eyes to mirror that entire history. She braces for the recall, the poorly masked pity, the transaction that feels more like charity than choice. Her posture is a defense. Her silence is a shield. She is waiting for the world to prove what she already knows, but the rancher's gaze doesn't travel the path she has mapped for it. It doesn't snag on the floor and spiral into a judgment. He looks, and he sees something else. And this is where our documentary leaves the lab and enters the frontier of human connection. Because the science that started with Dartmouth has now uncovered something it never expected. Recent, rigorous studies from institutions like the University of Pennsylvania are delivering a verdict that shatters the old assumptions. Researchers showed hundreds of people portraits of individuals with minor, well-healed facial scars. They asked them to rate these faces for attractiveness, confidence, and friendliness. The data came back, and it stopped the researchers cold. The scars did not make the faces less attractive. In many cases, they made no difference at all, and in some, they actually increased perceptions of friendliness and approachability. The anticipated deficit simply wasn't there. This changes everything. It means the cultural script is outdated. It means the fear in the mind is operating on old intelligence. The rancher isn't seeing past a flaw. He might be seeing something the data can now measure: character, resilience, a story. He is responding to a reality that the woman, trapped in the Dartmouth loop, cannot yet perceive. This clash between her internalized stigma and his unscripted perception is the first crack in the wall, but it is just a crack, because the deeper, more unsettling question is now on the table. If the scar itself isn't the ultimate barrier to love and acceptance, then what is? The answer lies in a disturbing asymmetry, a gap in perception so wide it explains the entire conflict. While our protagonist fears universal rejection, science reveals a bizarre double standard. Research from the University of Liverpool made a startling discovery. Many Western women actually find minor facial scarring on men attractive, associating it with health, bravery, and a history of survival. For men, a scar can be a badge. For women, the same mark is still often processed as a blemish. This isn't just social conditioning, it's evolutionary shorthand gone awry. The bias is baked in. This is the first major pivot. The barrier isn't the scar's physical reality, but the gendered story we attach to it. She isn't fighting his perception, she's fighting a 1,000-year-old narrative. And to break that narrative, we must enter the second layer of the trap, the beauty is good stereotype. This is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where we unconsciously assume attractive people are also kinder, smarter, more competent, and more trustworthy. We map moral goodness onto physical symmetry. Now reverse the equation. When a feature violates conventional beauty standards, the brain can unconsciously infer the opposite. Less trustworthy, less competent, less asterisk good asterisk. This is the silent translation happening in the glances she fears. It's not just she is marked, it's she is flawed asterisk. Her value isn't just diminished, her character is suspect. This is the real poison of the stigma. It doesn't just say you are less lovely, it whispers you are less worthy. So when the rancher looks at her, he is not just confronting a scar. He is confronting a lifetime of implicit bias, a cognitive shortcut that demands he devalue her. His hesitation, his quiet study, that isn't necessarily rejection. That is the conscious mind wrestling with the unconscious bias. He is doing the cognitive work the Dartmouth subjects never got a chance to do. He is interrogating the first impression. But this is where the plot thickens, because the rancher's world, the harsh frontier, operates on a different value system. Survival here isn't about unblemished porcelain skin, it's about calloused hands, resilience against drought, the strength to bear a hard season. In this context, a scar isn't a deviation from perfection, it's a testament to endurance. It is a record. It says, I have been through something and I am still here. This environmental reframing is critical. The ranch isn't a picturesque escape, it's a crucible. And in a crucible, you don't judge the vessel by its scratches, you judge it by whether it can hold heat. Her first days are a series of small, brutal failures: burned food, spilled water, clumsy hands. Each mistake is a test. She braces for the anger, the confirmation that her external flaw mirrors an internal incompetence. But the rancher's reaction is a silent dismantling of the beauty is good fallacy. He doesn't shout. He cleans up the spilled stew. He doesn't call her useless. He says, it's just stew. In that moment, he is separating her inherent worth from her performance. He is judging the action, not the person. This is a profound, almost radical act. It creates the first crack in her internal prison. The Dartmouth script predicted scorn. His calm neutrality feels like a miracle, but we are still in the foothills of acceptance. The real seismic shift requires a threat, an external force that forces a declaration of loyalty. Enter the world. In the original narrative, this is the trip to town, the confrontation with the sneering mother-in-law who represents the old, cruel social order. This is the moment the internalized stigma becomes external, vocal, and vicious. It's the voice of the entire culture she escaped, here to remind her of her place. She expects to be shamed back into invisibility. But then the rancher speaks. He doesn't defend her against the cruelty. He does something far more powerful. He redefines her value on his own terms. She's the one who gets Myra to sleep when her legs ache, he says, the one who taught Samson not to throw rocks. He translates her unseen, emotional labor, the care, the patience, the quiet rebuilding of a broken family, into a tangible worth that completely bypasses the scar. He isn't saying she's beautiful despite it. He is saying your metric is irrelevant. Here is her worth measured in my world. This is the death blow to the stigma. It is not forgiveness for a flaw. It is the complete negation of the flaw's importance. It declares that the scar is not part of the equation of her value. Psychologists have a term for this: unconditional positive regard. It is the bedrock of therapeutic healing. When someone reflects back your value without judgment, it allows you to rebuild a shattered self-concept. The rancher, without knowing the term, is providing it. And in that soil, something impossible begins to grow. But the brain, trained on fear, is a stubborn organ. One victory in town doesn't erase a lifetime of programming. The final, most insidious layer of the trap remains: identity. For many who live with a visible difference, the mark can become the core of their self-narrative. I am the person with the scar. It subsumes other identities: artist, reader, gardener, friend. The scar is no longer just a feature, it is the headline of their story. This is a protective mechanism. If you define yourself by the rejection you expect, you can't be hurt by it. You've already accepted the verdict. Our protagonist has done this. She has armored herself in expectation. For true acceptance to occur, this armor must be removed, and that is a terrifying vulnerability. To be seen not as the scarred woman, but simply as a woman, requires her to surrender that defensive identity. She must risk believing the rancher's new metric. This internal unraveling is the quiet, terrifying work of the middle of the story. It happens in the garden, with hands in the dirt. It happens in the sleepless nights tending a feverish child. It happens in the slow, wordless accumulation of shared labor. Each small act of competence, each moment of care met with quiet gratitude, is a brick laid in a new identity. She is becoming the one who heals, the one who stays, the one who makes bread rise. The scar is still there, but it is moving from the headline to a footnote in her own story. This psychological journey is mirrored by a shocking biological one. The science of neuroplasticity shows us that our brains physically rewire based on experience. The neural pathways that once flashed danger or rejection at the sight of her own reflection can, with repeated, safe, positive feedback, begin to form new connections. The rancher's consistent, value-based perception is literally helping to rewire her brain away from the Dartmouth loop. But just as this new, fragile self is beginning to cohere, the frontier reminds them that acceptance is not a passive state. It is a choice that must be defended, sometimes violently. The external threat returns not as gossip, but as physical danger, the drunk trapper at the well. This assault is the ultimate test. It is the world trying to force her back into the old story, an object to be claimed, devalued because of her mark. And this time, the rancher doesn't just speak, he acts. He defends. His violence isn't glorified, it's presented as a necessary, ugly line in the sand. No one touches you, he says. The statement is absolute. It draws a boundary around her not as a fragile thing, but as a person under his protection. His knuckles bleed for her, and in a final, sacred reversal, she tends his wounds. The caregiver and the protected switch roles. The dynamic becomes reciprocal. She is not a burden he carries, she is a partner he fights for, and who then tends to him. This reciprocity is the final nail in the coffin of the transactional beauty for value economy she came from. But this hard-won piece, this new identity, now faces its most devastating test, because the world has one more weapon, far more subtle and corrosive than gossip or violence. It is the weapon of pity, disguised as opportunity, and it arrives in a polished wagon with a government map. The men in the wagon don't offer pity, they offer escape, a rail line, good money, a new house, a better school, real security for the children. They frame the offer as progress, as a lifeline out of hardship. This is the most seductive form of rejection, the world saying, we don't want you as you are, but we will pay you to disappear. It is the ultimate negation of their value system, an attempt to monetize their defiance. The rancher's refusal is instant. No. But this no isn't the end of the pressure, it's the beginning of a siege. Because the external world, when its first offer is rejected, doesn't just go away, it leans in. The drought arrives, 7 weeks without rain. The sky turns the color of bone, the creek shrivels to mud, the land cracks open like a wound. This is the wait, it gets worse moment. The psychological war becomes an existential one. The stigma of the scar is replaced by the stigma of failure. A man who cannot feed his children, a woman who cannot make a garden grow, this is a new kind of nakedness. The drought weaponizes their isolation. It tests not just their bond, but the very premise of their choice. Is a love built on defiance strong enough to starve for? In this crucible, a terrifying role reversal occurs. The rancher, the pillar of stoic strength, collapses near a fence post, felled by heat and exhaustion. The caregiver becomes the patient. And here, the woman with the scar does not flinch. She tends to him through the night, spooning water between his lips, wiping his brow. In his fevered sleep, he whispers the deepest fear, "Don't leave me, not you too." This is the vulnerability beneath his strength. His need for her is now as raw as her need for acceptance. Her response, "I'm not going anywhere," is no longer an expression of gratitude. It is a vow. It is the conscious, active choice the Dartmouth subjects never got to make. She is choosing to stay in the hard place, not because she has no other option, but because her presence is needed. This reciprocity of need is the engine of profound attachment, but the land remains unyielding. The garden, her symbolic fight, appears lost. Every morning she breaks earth as hard as stone, her hands blistering, her labor seeming futile. This is the second-order consequence. Even active love and choice can feel powerless against indifferent nature. It threatens to unravel everything, to prove that their defiance was just stubbornness, that the world's metrics of security were right all along. Then Samson bursts from the cabin. "Ma, come quick." And there beneath a curling vine is a single imperfect red tomato, alive. This isn't just a vegetable, it is a biological rebellion. It is evidence that their care, against all odds, translated into something tangible. The rancher asks the only question that matters: how? Her answer rewrites their entire story. "You taught me," she says, "not everything worth keeping comes easy." In that moment, the scar, the drought, the struggle, they are no longer marks of damage, but proof of endurance. The tomato is a shared victory, a symbol that their specific, hard-won way of life can actually create asterisk sustenance. It is the antidote to the railroad's generic offer of security. Their security is this: the knowledge that they can make something grow together in barren soil. This hardened peace creates the space for the final, quiet surrender. The kiss that follows is not one of passion born from beauty, but of recognition born from shared struggle. He kisses her hand, blistered and stained with earth, then her lips. There is no audience, no music, just the wind and the rustle of the surviving garden. This is the integration. The scar is not seen past. It is part of the landscape of her, a feature of the person he has fought for, starved with, and chosen again. But the world's siege has a final, bureaucratic phase. The railroad men return. This time the pressure isn't seductive, it's implied. The map is spread again. The offer is repeated with less courtesy. The rancher's second no must now be made permanent, public, and physical. He and the woman build a sign together. She drives the nails. The sign, reading "Not for Sale," is planted at the edge of their land. This act transforms their private choice into a public declaration. It is a boundary etched into the world. They are no longer just defying stigma. They are defying progress, economics, and the very tide of history. They are saying their story, written on this specific patch of earth, is more valuable than the railroad's plot. The backlash from the wider community is immediate, but it takes a subtle, corrosive form. In Dust Bend, some laugh at their foolishness. Others nod quietly, perhaps envious of their defiance, but no one comes to help. The community's rejection is no longer about her face, it's about their choice. They are now oddities, stubborn relics. This social isolation is the price of their integrity, yet within the fence line, a deeper alchemy is happening. The children who have witnessed all of it, the rejection, the fight, the drought, the defiance, begin to call her Mama, not by instruction but by instinct. It starts with Levi, passes to Gideon, then Myra, then Samson. The word is uttered like a fact of nature. This is the ultimate reparenting. She's being given a fundamental identity she was once told she could never have: mother. It is the community's verdict overturned by the jury of the only people who matter. This naming is the final brick in her new identity. She is not the scarred woman, she is Mama, the one who heals, who stays, who makes bread rise. But just as this new world seems cemented, the plot delivers its cruelest twist. It comes not from the railroad or the drought, but from within the sanctuary itself. Gideon, one of the children, is injured. A bad fall, a jagged gash from the axe, blood on the woodpile. This is the nightmare scenario for any parent, but for her it carries a specific, paralyzing fear: failure. If she cannot fix this, it will prove every implicit bias right. That beauty's absence means incompetence. That her nurturing is superficial, useless in a real crisis. She works with trembling hands, pressing cloth to the wound, her tears mixing with his blood. Her heart is pounding with the terror of loss, not just of the child, but of everything she has built. Then Gideon, pale and in pain, looks up at her and whispers, "Don't cry, Mama, you make the best biscuits." In that phrase, the child articulates the entire thesis of the story. He separates her emotional response from her capability. He affirms her value in his terms, as a source of comfort and care, even in his own agony. He calls her Mama not as a plea, but as a statement of fact. It is the final, irrevocable proof that her worth is not contingent on perfection or an unblemished face, but on presence and love. The bleeding slows. The crisis passes. Later, Judah, the most reserved child, asks the direct question they have all been dancing around. "So you staying?" She doesn't answer with words. She nods. The contract, which began as a sale of barren livestock, is now sealed with a silent, mutual vow. This internal victory sets the stage for the final, quiet conversation between the woman and the rancher. On the porch, under the stars, he voiced the fear that has haunted him since he dropped the coins on the table. "I figured I was giving you a way out. I never thought I had a right to keep you." He offers her freedom, releasing her from the original transaction. Her answer is the culmination of her entire psychological journey. "I used to think love meant being chosen at first sight," she says, "but I've learned something better. Being chosen again after someone's seen who you really are." This is the mature love that transcends the initial, superficial hook of attraction. It is love as a conscious, repeated choice. It is the antithesis of the Dartmouth experiment's premise. She is choosing to stay, not because she fears the outside world's rejection, but because she has been truly seen and valued within this one. Her choice mirrors his. The circle is closed. But a documentary about human psychology must ask, is this just a beautiful story, or is it replicable? What happens when the specific conditions of the frontier are removed? This brings us to the final, shocking revelation of Act 2, a revelation that forces us to re-examine everything we think we know about beauty, bias, and the possibility of change. The answer comes from an unexpected source, the very media that once perpetuated the myth. A landmark study examined what happened when people watched a documentary featuring individuals with visible facial differences, not as villains or objects of pity, but as whole people with full lives. The results were profound. After viewing, participants reported reduced intentions to behave in a stigmatizing way. Their perception of what constituted beautiful broadened. They even felt more positive about their own bodies. This is the modern replication of the rancher's gaze. Exposure, when framed with humanity, can rewire social perception. It can dismantle the beauty is good stereotype at a cultural level. This tells us the frontier story isn't an antique fairy tale. It's a blueprint. It demonstrates the core mechanics of how stigma is dismantled through consistent, value-based recognition that deliberately ignores the old script. But what about the internal scar, the Dartmouth expectation? Can that be healed once the external world changes its mind? Here, the story deepens into legacy. Time, in the original narrative, moves like weather. The children grow and leave, but the house never empties. It fills with grandchildren, new laughter, the smell of bread from the same oven. The woman's garden spreads, a wild, flourishing testament to her care. This isn't just a happy ending, it's visual proof of the neuroplasticity we discussed. The pathways in her brain that once signaled danger and rejection have been permanently rewired by decades of safety, belonging, and purpose. The scar is now just a part of her face, a fact as neutral as the color of her eyes. The man watches her in the garden each morning, not as a keeper, but as a witness to a miracle he helped create. The ultimate validation comes not from him, but from a new generation. A grandson asks why they call it Kate's Garden. The man points to the words he carved into the garden gate arch. "She did not bear my blood, but she gave birth to the rest of my life." This line is the philosophical payoff. It severs biology from legacy, appearance from impact. It states clearly that the greatest contributions often come from those society initially discards. Her worth was never in unblemished fertility, but in the life she cultivated. This is the final, triumphant refutation of her father's cruel label in the square, but a true documentary must confront mortality. The woman passes, the man buries her under the old oak tree and carves her headstone himself. It reads, "Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway." This is the epitaph for everyone who has ever been undervalued. It speaks to the miraculous alchemy of taking absence and transforming it into abundance. The man joins her not long after, and here comes the final, surprising detail, the one that elevates this from metaphor to something resembling natural law. The garden does not die. The narrative insists on it. It kept growing, even when frost came early, even when the earth cracked again, even when the rains forgot their way. It grew back not in neat rows, but in wild spirals of life. This is the biological echo of their love. It suggests that a choice made deeply enough, a value system enacted faithfully enough, can imprint itself on a place. It becomes an ecology. The love they chose literally altered the soil. Travelers on the road still slow to read the sun-bleached, wind-battered sign, "Not for sale." The sign no longer defends against railroad men. It now speaks to anyone passing by. It says, "Someone was once allowed to stay here. That's enough." This is the story's final gift. It is no longer just their story. It is an invitation. The narrative arc is now complete. We opened with the cold psychology of the Dartmouth Scar experiment, where imagined stigma manufactured real isolation. We traversed the harsh landscape of gendered bias and the beauty is good fallacy. We witnessed the slow, hard work of building a new identity brick by brick, through shared labor, defended boundaries, and chosen vulnerability. We saw that identity blossom into a legacy that rewrote the definition of family and value. We end with a garden that refuses to die and a sign that endures. The hook's promise is resolved. The scar was not the barrier. The barrier was the story we told about it. The healing was not in ignoring the mark, but in building a world where the mark was irrelevant to a person's worth. The rancher didn't find her beautiful despite the scar. In the context of the life they built, a life of endurance, care, and defiant love, he likely came to see it as part of the map of her, a feature of the landscape he cherished. The poetic justice is complete. The one labeled barren became the source of immense growth. The one sold as livestock became the heart of a home that could not be bought. The data and the drama align. Our first impressions are often wrong, our deepest fears can lie to us, and the most profound acceptance begins when someone decides to use a different metric. This brings us to our final reflection. So what do we take from this frontier? The story of the scar and the rancher is not an anomaly. It is a case study in the mechanics of redemption. It shows us that the most powerful antidote to stigma is not blindness, but a recalibration of values. It proves that environments can be built, a ranch, a family, a relationship, where the old metrics simply do not apply. The challenge it leaves us with is not about finding a rancher, but about becoming one. It asks us to audit our own gaze. What outdated metrics are we using to judge worth in others? And more painfully, what internalized scars are we allowing to write the script of our own lives, expecting rejection long before it ever comes? The data and the story converge on a single, liberating truth. The flaw you believe defines you is often invisible to the person who sees your value. The work is to build the courage to believe them, to accept the new metric, and to finally step out of the Dartmouth experiment of your own mind. Your value was never in your unblemished surface, but in the depth of what you can grow from cracked ground. If this exploration of perception, bias, and the hidden architecture of connection changed how you see, even a little, then you've already begun the work. Consider subscribing for more journeys into the stories and science that reshape our world. Thank you for watching.